The sound of a bell chimed as the bus door hissed open, revealing the dimly lit interior. Oliver hesitated for a moment at the entrance, his eyes scanning the bus interior, where rows of worn-out seats stretched toward the back, illuminated only by the flickering overhead lights. He was late for work, and the next bus wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. With a resigned sigh, he stepped inside, finding a seat next to a window, his breath fogging the glass as he settled in. As the bus pulled away from the stop, Oliver noticed a peculiar vibe hanging in the air, thick with an unshakable sense of unease. The other passengers were a mix of disheveled commuters and those who seemed completely out of place. A woman in a long flowing dress sat in the front, her gaze fixed on something only she could see. Across the aisle, a man in a worn-out suit fidgeted nervously, his fingers tapping a rapid rhythm against the armrest. They were all quiet, each absorbed in their own world, creating a disconcerting harmony of silence. The bus continued to roll down a road that felt increasingly surreal. Outside the window, the scenery shifted with every passing moment. At first, it was the familiar suburbs of Oliver's city, the same coffee shops and grocery stores he passed daily. But soon, the landscape warped. Buildings became twisted, their angles defying geometry, while streets were dotted with eerie, flickering streetlights that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly glow. Shadows flickered along the periphery of his vision, and Oliver couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching him. As the bus stopped at the first station, the doors slid open with a creak that echoed ominously. A figure stood at the entrance, a tall man with a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. Oliver squinted, trying to catch a glimpse of his features, but the shadows danced around him, and he remained a mere silhouette. The figure stepped inside, and Oliver's stomach twisted as the air seemed to grow heavier, suffocating in its thickness. The man took a seat directly across from Oliver, the light above flickering erratically as he leaned back. Oliver could see now that the man wore a faded trench coat, and he exuded an unsettling calm, as if the chaos around them was merely a backdrop to his own serenity. The man's gaze locked onto Oliver, sending a shiver down his spine. "Nice day for a ride, isn't it?" he said, his voice a gravely whisper that carried a hint of amusement. Yeah," Oliver replied, forcing a smile that felt brittle on his lips. With that, the bus lurched forward, the door closing with a definitive thud. Oliver felt a weight lift momentarily, but his relief was short-lived. The next stop revealed another strange town, its buildings teetering on the brink of collapse, covered in strange graffiti that writhed as if alive. The townsfolk moved about aimlessly, their eyes glassy, faces devoid of emotion. One woman turned and locked eyes with Oliver, her mouth stretching into an unsettling grin before she turned back, blending into the shadows of the alleyway. The bus picked up speed, leaving the town behind as the air thickened with tension. More passengers boarded, each stranger than the last. An elderly woman with a wrinkled face and milky eyes murmured to herself in a language Oliver couldn't understand. A pair of children giggled in the back, their laughter hollow and echoing like a ghostly chorus. He wanted to look away, to escape their gazes, but an invisible force held him in place, trapped within this strange realm. "Where are we going?" he finally asked, turning to the man in the trench coat. "Somewhere special," the man replied, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "You'll see." The next stop was an even more distorted version of reality, the bus rolling into a town that looked as if it had been pulled straight from a nightmare. Buildings leaned precariously, casting twisted shadows that danced under a sky painted with unnatural hues. The ground beneath the bus shimmered as if it were made of glass, and the inhabitants walked in slow motion, their movements jerky and disjointed. Oliver felt the urge to scream, to leap off the bus and run, but something kept him tethered to his seat. The air grew thick with whispers, voices overlapping in a cacophony of unintelligible words that filled his ears. It was maddening. The passengers began to shift, their faces morphing into grotesque visages, their eyes sunken and filled with a darkness that swallowed light. As the bus sped on, the lights flickered more violently, casting shadows that twisted into horrific shapes. The man in the trench coat leaned forward, his smile wide, revealing teeth that glinted like knives. "Don't be afraid, Oliver. This is just the beginning." Panic surged within him, and he glanced around, desperate for a way out. He noticed the elderly woman, her eyes rolling back in her head as she began to convulse. The children in the back had stopped laughing instead. They were staring at him with vacant expressions, their faces pale and ghostly. The bus continued its relentless journey, each stop revealing towns more warped and grotesque than the last. A landscape filled with rivers of darkness, fields of decaying trees, and creatures that moved just beyond his line of sight. The whispers grew louder, drowning out his thoughts, each syllable taunting him, echoing promises of doom. Then, in the corner of his eye, he saw the final destination looming ahead. A grand structure, its architecture a blend of Gothic spires and surreal designs that defied logic. The ground was covered in mist, swirling around like a living entity, beckoning him closer. The bus slowed, the doors creaking open to reveal the place that seemed to pulse with an energy not meant for the living. "This is where you belong," the man in the trench coat said, his voice low and hypnotic. "Step outside, Oliver. It's time to join us." Fear gripped him like a vice, but he found himself rising from his seat, compelled by an unseen force. The passengers had transformed into specters, their eyes wide with anticipation. They whispered his name, urging him forward, their voices melding into one. He stepped off the bus, the mist curling around his ankles as he moved toward the entrance of the grand structure. Shadows danced along the walls, and Oliver felt a pull toward the unknown, a siren's call, luring him deeper into the heart of darkness. As he crossed the threshold, the world outside vanished, and he was enveloped in an abyss that echoed with the cries of the forgotten. He was home, or perhaps it was a prison on eternal existence in a realm where the living and the dead intertwined. The bus rumbled away, leaving behind only the lingering sound of its engine, a haunting reminder of the journey that had led him to this moment.